This is why in Egyptian temples, if you go in at the gate and you walk, there's a straight axis, you walk, it's discernible by experience, but you couldn't really see it visually. The ground goes up at a very light, slow grade. And as you're walking toward what's at the end, and of course at the end, what would there be? How many times have we read this? God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. How do you do that? If this was like an IQ test, how do you do that? How do you gather all the waters into one place and then call them seas? Plural. How do you do that? And there's dry land there. So you got dry land, you got waters in one place, but you've got plural seas. Can anybody draw that for me? Psalm 89 is really, again, a fascinating example here, if I can get it to open. There we go. Let's just read through parts of Psalm 89. I will sing of the steadfast love of the Lord forever. In my mouth I will make known your faithfulness to all generations. For I said, steadfast love will be built up forever. In the heavens you will establish your faithfulness. You have said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David my servant. I will establish your offspring forever and build your throne for all generations. Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. Again, this is a scene in heaven, God surrounded by the heavenly host. Again, divine council terminology. You've heard me use that term before. It's just God in the heavenly host. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Lord in all caps is Yahweh. Who among the heavenly beings, the Hebrew literally has, who among the sons of the gods is like the Lord? A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. O Lord God of hosts, who is mighty as you are, O Lord, with your faithfulness all around you. You rule the raging sea. You rule over Yam. When its waves rise, you still them. You crushed Rahav like a carcass. Okay, Rahav here is another word for the sea beast, the chaos beast. You scattered your enemies with your mighty arm. The heavens are yours, the earth also is yours, the world and all that is in it. You have founded them. The north and the south, you have created them. Tabor and Hermon joyously praise your name. You have a mighty arm. Strong is your hand. High your right hand. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. Blessed are the people who know the festal shout, who walk, O Lord, in the light of your face. Let's go down here a little ways. We'll skip a few verses for speed. Come on. Of old you spoke in a vision to your godly one and said, I have granted help to one who is mighty. I have exalted one chosen from the people. I have found David my servant. With my holy oil I have anointed him. So that my hand shall be established with him, my arm shall also strengthen him. The enemy shall not outwit him, the wicked will not humble him. I will crush his foes before him and strike down those who hate him. My faithfulness and my steadfast love shall be with him, and in my name shall his horn be exalted. It's repeating a lot of the language that we've seen before. And then he says about David, I will set his hand on the sea. I will put his hand, the right hand of authority, over the sea. This is very obviously messianic because only God can do that. Only God can control the forces of chaos. David can't do that. He's just a guy. But a Davidic king, who is also Yahweh, can pull that off. I will set his hand on the sea, at his right hand on the Nahar. Remember the other name in the Ugaritic text for the deity, the water deity, Nahar? His right hand on the rivers. He shall cry to me, you are my Father, my God, the rock of my salvation. I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. You know what the word highest there is? Let's see if we can just click through to our interlinear and actually use that thing. It's Elyon, Most High. Elyon in the Semitic world was a title for guess who? Baal. It's one of the titles of Baal that gets applied to Yahweh. God is saying, not only am I the real Most High, but the king, I will set his hand over the seas. He will be the Most High. I will make him the firstborn. Is that a familiar term? Firstborn is a rank of authority. Jesus is called firstborn. How many? You see these connections. Okay, firstborn, Most High, ruling over chaos. This is a Davidic psalm that rehearses the Davidic covenant, the covenant God made with David to have the everlasting dynasty. It's full of this, creation imagery that an Israelite would have gone, wow, man, that's going to be great. What a guy, And more than that, he would be thinking, well, I watched David grow up. How's he going to do that? Only God can do that. Either this king is going to be like God on earth, or maybe we'll have God on earth as the king. That's kind of the way it would seem to work. They're Israelites. They don't have the New Testament, but they've got these pieces of the picture going through their heads. Let's go back here. There are New Testament implications to this. Anybody know what happens in Mark 4? Everybody's going to cheat quick. Well, let's go there. We'll save some time. Think about it, to an Israelite. These guys have their Old Testament. They've got the worldview in their brains. They know the stories. They're Semites. They're Israelites. This guy Jesus comes along and he claims to be the Son of God. Son of God, King of Israel. Man, it sounds a lot like Psalm 89. Ooh, boy, that's kind of weird. And he comes to them one day, or one night. On that day, one evening had come, he said to them, let's go across to their side. Leaving the boat, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And we know the whole story. He goes out onto the rough and raging sea and says, quiet. And it is. And their reaction is like, oh boy. What did we just see? Okay, if they're clicking it all up here, they know what that, he's God. And more than that, if John or somebody got up that morning and read Psalm 89 in his devotions, he's thinking, man, his hand shall, I'll put his hand over this. They're clicking. They're just clicking with these little tidbits in the text. This isn't a story placed in here just because Mark's like, man, I'm a few lines short of a column. What do I put in here? No, it's deliberate. It's messaging. We go back. We get Matthew 14. It's, again, somewhat similar. It's walking on the water. The chaos has no effect on me. In fact, I tread on it. Again, mentally up here, the pieces are just floating around in their head. And Jesus will do things, or he'll say things. After 3.5 years of this, it's no wonder that he looks at him and says, haven't I been with you 3.5 years and you don't get this yet? How could you miss this? We have a few minutes. We'll hit Egypt a little bit. Now, my font. See, we didn't check the font, Dax. In Egypt, the watery abyss, if you can't read that, it says Heliopolitan theology. Egyptian creation theology and Egyptian religion generally changed depending on what city was the capital city, because where the pharaoh wants to live, he sort of gets to decide what the doctrine is. But generally, one of the main versions of this is called the Heliopolitan theology. So you have the same idea, except in Egypt, they're not really thinking of the primeval deities as specific elements like water and dirt and all that stuff. They think of them as conditions, what it was like when there was nothing or before there was everything. And so they take some of the terminology for conditions to be represented by deities. The primary deity that emerges, now catch the language here, in this theology, the creator, Atum, who later becomes known as Ra, emerges from this watery thing. He's always been there. He just didn't come out. So they believed in a pre-existent deity, at least the writers of this theology. Ra, Atum, emerges and starts to do what all the other deities do. I got to bring order, out of this chaotic mess. He emerges from the noon, the watery abyss. So he is responsible for his own existence. So he's thought of as self-created. Atum, Ra, creates the world as the Egyptians know it. Again, we'll skip ahead. And what Atum, Ra does, back to where does everything come from? How would we describe that if we're not scientists? The original pairing that Atum Ra creates, Shu, the dry air, and Tefnut, the moist air, it varies. Some say he did that by spitting. Okay, so there you get a watery idea and air. Others say he used his own semen to produce them. Some say it's a combination of both. But again, they're not trying to be titillating. They're not trying to be crude. They're saying, where does stuff come from? Oh, you got sex, you got planting, you got building stuff. I mean, again, this is the language of experience. And so it varies with the story. These two deities get together, and they father Earth, whose name is Geb, and Nut, who is sky. And then they get together, and they're real busy. They're going to have 4 kids. Osiris, who will inherit the lordship of Earth from Geb. Isis, she is the sister and the wife of Osiris. We have Nephthys and the bad guy, Seth, and they're also a couple. So to the Egyptian, this is where the things that we experience in our created world are the result of the creative power of Atum Ra, who was uncreated, and he arose from this watery abyss. And they never, if you'd ask them, well, where'd the watery abyss come from? Their answer would be, well, those were the olden deities that were just kind of there. And they don't interact with people, but out of them Ra came and then brought everything else that we know and interact with. This group was known as the Aeneid, which is the 9. And there's one missing, and the one missing is Horus, who is the offspring of Isis and Osiris in the story. And it's from him that kingship descends from the gods. Every pharaoh is the incarnation of Horus. He is Horus on earth. Okay, so there's actually 9. This is how an Egyptian, if he had a very, very cheap graphics program, would have drawn the first time. That's how an Egyptian would say in the beginning. The first time. So you have a mound come up with Atum Ra on it. Hey, I'm here. Thought I'd wake up and actually do something here. I've been in this watery abyss for forever. Haha, joke. Okay, because there is no time yet. I've been here forever. I thought I'd come out. He rises up on this mound. By the way, the mound shape, this is why they did the pyramidal thing. Okay, the capstone, pyramidal capstone on a lot of their architecture. That was to commemorate the first time, the original mound. This is why in Egyptian temples, if you go in at the gate and you walk, there's a straight axis, you walk, it's discernible by experience, but you couldn't really see it visually. The ground goes up at a very light, slow grade. And as you're walking toward what's at the end, and of course at the end, what would there be? The mound, okay? At the end, the buildings are decorated as though it's the watery abyss. Okay, you have little, papyrus plants on the walls, and there's lots of water drawn, and there's the sky up above. And it's a recreation, a recommemoration of the emergence of all that is. That's what happens in the temple. Okay, it's a reenactment. It's also why the God at the end sometimes is put in a little boat, because there's water there. You got to watch out. You don't want to get him wet. Genesis 1:9-10. How many times have we read this? God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place." How do you do that? If this was like an IQ test, how do you do that? How do you gather all the waters into one place and then call them seas, plural? How do you do that? And there's dry land there. So you got dry land, you got waters in one place, but you've got plural seas. Can anybody draw that for me? Yeah, with a better graphics program. That's what it looks like. The waters are in one place. But depending on your orientation, you could be at a different sea. And the land is in the middle. Now, next week, we're going to see a whole series of verses that describe this in the Old Testament. The edges, where the sky meets the land at the curve and the edge. Old Testament cosmology is a round earth surrounded by water, over which is the sky. And then underneath is what? It's the bad place. Have you ever wondered where we get this idea that hell is like down there? It's from the Old Testament, because that's where Sheol is. That's the Old Testament word for Sheol. Our conception comes right out of, again, the Judeo-Christian worldview. I could show you another text. Egypt, there's one other theology. It's called the Memphite theology. You look at, in Genesis 1, who gets credit for gathering the seas into one place and the land emerging? Okay, it's Yahweh. You don't find that in Babylonian stories. You don't find that at Ugarit. You do find it in Egypt. So the writer writing the Old Testament says, well, okay, I kind of slapped the Ugaritic people around. I dissed Baal sufficiently. And I took a swipe at Marduk, got him. Who's left? Oh, the Egyptians. Well, okay, we need to make sure that in our account that our messaging is clear. Because if we leave the Egyptians go, someone might get the mistaken impression that they're actually right somewhere, but they're not. Even the creation with the spoken word, Genesis 1, God speaks and things come into existence. That occurs only one other place in the ancient world. It's very rare, and that is Egypt. There's a theology, a creation story in Egypt with the god's name is Ta. In that case, again, capital is Memphis, so we rewrite the story and put our patron god in charge. And in that version, Ta, when he brings all the Aeneid into existence, see if we have our text open here, we read things like this. There was evolution into Atum's image through both heart and the tongue. And great and important is Ta, who gave life to all the gods and their cause, as well as through this heart and this tongue. So the way Ta creates is through the heart. In Egypt was the seat of emotions and intellect. Again, they're not doing brain science. His thought and his speech is what produces everything. It has evolved that heart and tongue have control of all the limbs, blah, 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 so on and so forth. He does whatever he wants, don't they all? His Aeneid is before him in teeth and lips. It's with the mouth. He creates with the mouth. That seed in those hands of Atum. So what the other guys were writing about Atum doing this with his seed, his semen and his hands building stuff. Ptah really did that, and he did it in an even superior way. He just spoke. He just thought and spoke, and then it happened. Take that. Okay, again, this is earlier than biblical material. So again, the writer's sitting around, well, did we address Egypt enough? We want to be theologically clear. We want people to know who the Creator really is. So did we miss anything? And some scribe, some snotty student shows up and says, "Oh yeah, you missed Ptah." Okay. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I mean, they're trying. I'm being a little trivial, a little flippant, with the examples. But I want you to get the idea of what they're doing. They are intellectually putting a lot of effort into how do we express who the Creator is and make it theologically correct so that no one can read this and go away thinking that any other deity anywhere had anything to do with this other than Yahweh. So they're shooting. They're going after the competing ideas. And they're hitting their mark. Now to us, we look at this and, half the time, I know what it feels like. You read the Old Testament, it's like, man, that's just bizarre. And trust me, there are passages I read and I have no idea what's going on there. I have no idea what's going on there. I'll mark that one down to go visit again. Because we just don't have this in our head. We don't know who Ptah is. We don't know who Ra is. We don't know who Atum is. We don't know what the noon is. We don't know what they did. Because as a Jew, you interact with Egypt a lot. You certainly interacted with them during the captivity. You interact with them through the rest of your history, either nicely with trade or badly with military conflict. Egypt controlled Palestine for hundreds and hundreds of years in biblical days. You certainly interacted with the Babylonians. You basically spent 70 years there stewing, listening to them tell you that their God defeated yours. Oh, you know those stories. Okay, they remind you. I mean, they know. This is their worldview. So I wanted to try to give you a little exposure to that, because when you read through, and these aren't the only ones, when you read through the Old Testament, strange names, strange place names, you should spend a little time looking those up. You'll be surprised. Again, use a Bible dictionary or Bible handbook and look some of those things up. What happens at those places at other times? Which deity was supposed to control that place? Okay. Why does that deity get that name? Does that name show up anywhere else? Okay. There's all this kind of stuff going on under the surface. And again, with Genesis, with creation, again, just leaving you with the thought, it's about theological messaging. That's what they're going after. Now, we have pretty much ended right on time, so we took 10 or 15 minutes questions last time. You may fire away. Ask me. Yes, Bradley, go ahead.
So if that's just sort of like God uses out of the Big Bang, might not be saying that every assertion and every gunmal theories are correct, and also God's standard, it might just be, like you said, a poetic down. God's the ultimate cause of the thing in this kind of world.
Yeah, that is the. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that, because even scientists will bicker. I mean, Stephen Hawking now, he rejects the Big Bang. So it is the way it's expressed in the scientific community can, on a conceptual, theological, and polemic level, be essentially saying the same sort of thing, the same idea. Because as soon as you take, let's say you're a Big Bang cosmologist, and you say, well, this is the way we as 21st century people express this, the moment when everything came into being. Again, try to dismiss from your head for a moment, well, where'd the stuff come from that caused the Big Bang? You try to put that aside. Okay, if you're just expressing things in terms of a Big Bang, and then you're a theistic evolutionist or some other label, and you accept the Big Bang and you say, look, that's the way we say it today. God's the one who did that. It sort of has the same purpose to it, the same strategy. Maybe we should put it that way.
Sure. So then when we look at what makes sense before, should we now read it as regarding natural
Spiritual battle happened more as barring than logical length to make a feel.
Right. On one level, it's all a spiritual battle because there's a spiritual being who controls chaos and subdues it and minds it. Did God actually have to, put up his dukes and punch out, an actual dragon somewhere in the spiritual world? I don't think that's the point at all. I think what they're grappling with is they know by experience in life that things just happen. And I think the reason the sea is picked is because as terrestrial human beings, you can't do anything in that. I mean, you're helpless. You are completely at its mercy. And even if you're on a boat, I mean, there's this great fear. There's a reason why the sea is always, is the candidate for the uncontrollable thing, because you can't control it in any way. So I think that's really the point, that we know that the natural world we live in is unpredictable and uncontrollable, but we know it got here. And so we're combining the belief that our God can control it and that it was produced. So we're combining the two ideas into that. But I don't think that you have a situation where God's actually in mortal combat, with another entity. Dax.
So I understand kind of summarizing it. You're saying it's theological messaging with some set of those. Well, the question behind this is that the question gets raised part of that, or here part of that. Well, that's fine, we would accept that. But where the Bible speaks, it's science, it's true, or where the Bible is true statements. For example, birds were created, it seems like, by the Genesis account before livestock.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So is that? Are you getting an view, or what would you say to those kind of things?
You mean the things that are created sort of like in reverse order that you would expect scientifically?
Because it doesn't follow what I would say.
Yeah, I would say you're correct in that it doesn't really follow what anybody says, because everybody's trying to make a scientific commentary out of it. Even if you're an evolutionist, you're a theistic evolutionist, you're a traditional 24-hour day creationist. Everyone's trying to create a scientific narrative, and you can do some of that. Again, rationally, you can do some of that, but there are always these places that it doesn't work. Genesis 1, I think it's verse 21, that the ground produced cattle. Really? I mean, an evolutionist can't justify that, or can they? What does that mean, ground produced? I mean, they can imagine their way to it, if they're really creative, I think overly creative. A creationist can't do that. I mean, you have these thorny things. The other question is, who gets to be the literalist? I interpret the Bible literally. Really? Do you interpret everything in Genesis literally? Like there really are doors in heaven and windows in heaven, and God opens and shuts them, and there are bars that support the earth and bars that support the sky. I mean, oh no, I don't take those things literally. Why not? See, what you have here in the Genesis creation fight is everybody has the perfect balance of literal and symbolic. Everybody does. My view of that is the right one. If you take one passage and you deliteralize it, you're a compromiser. If you take one passage and make it literal where I don't, you just don't get it. You're just going too far with that. Would to God that you got the balance that I have. Okay, I mean, that's really what's happening. There's no way for everyone to agree on exactly what should be taken literally and what shouldn't be taken literally and have everybody come out at the same place. And the debates between the two extremes are exactly that. If you made a list of all the statements, you can almost categorize people by verse count, word count, literal versus non-literal. Well, if you get more than 70%, you're going to be over here. And 30%, yeah, you're between these two. The liberating thing, I think, is to just let it be what it is. Okay, they're making theological statements. They're telling you what you ought to believe. Okay, they don't have any of the wherewithal to communicate the kinds of things that we would want them to communicate. Again, you're dealing with a world where, did you know that, the reason that I love my wife is because my intestines tell me to do that. It just, and somebody in that culture, and even in our culture, we know what you mean. We know. But we let it pass because we know that you're not trying to make it a scientific statement. If we thought you were, we'd probably pick up the phone and ask for some assistance. Okay, we have somebody here who needs medical attention. Within our culture, we let that go. My own way, I don't want to get too much into next week because I'm going to deal with a lot of this next week, is that we intuitively are able, if I say, I love you with all my heart, okay, that's not a scientific statement. My heart pumps blood. Electrical impulses go through it, and it just, okay, that's what it does. All right, there's nothing emotive that comes out of it. That comes here, and then it might affect me somewhere else in the gut or in, the bosom here because of hormones and electrical impulse. We know all this stuff, but yet I can say that. We intuitively know how to distinguish between the truth claim, the guts, the real thing that's being asserted, and the path it takes. I can make a completely unscientific statement, and yet my truth claim, my assertion, can be completely true, completely coherent. And because you live in my world and we speak the same language, we don't have a language barrier, you get it like that. The problem is we're dealing with an ancient document, and they're doing the same thing. They're using the language of experience, the language of appearances, because that's their world. And the more we immerse ourselves in their world, we can intuitively know, okay, here's how they're saying it, but here's really what the point is. And the point is not in error. The point is true. It's correct. The things that the Bible asserts are not mistaken. Hey, we do it with our own lives, our own experience, our own conversations. It's just more difficult when it comes to an ancient document because it's not our native culture. There's a gap. You do realize that the context for understanding the Bible is not the Protestant Reformation. It's not the Roman Catholic Church. It's not 20th century or 21st century evangelicalism. The context for the Old Testament is the context that produced it, which we don't have anymore. We have vestiges of it. We have memories of it. We have a few artifacts here and there that help us to sort of, piece that together. But that's the ambition of the biblical interpreter, to try to think their thoughts after them. And it's difficult. It's an imperfect process. The problem isn't with the text. The problem is up here. Okay? It's the gap. And too often the text gets blamed for our deficiencies, which is another place I love to take people who are errantists. Again, I use words like inspiration and inerrancy because I know the problem is really you, okay, and me. You're making the statement you're making for completely understandable reasons because you were born in 1961 in America. All these things. But you're not judging it for what it is. You're judging it for what you want to shoot at it for. That's just hardly fair. Anybody else have a question? I know I rambled there a little bit, but yes.
Might be a little off the top. I'm just curious. Do you think that there's a parallel between the Greek gods and goddesses that are Parthenon and characters in Genesis?
Characters?
Well, there's different people that are across the Genesis. Do you think there's a parallel where the Greeks doing that stuff on them, where they make a point? Snake is worshipped in Greek culture because it is a future, but in Hebrew culture, the snake is the bad, of course, and command is exalted by Greeks, and quite the sort of theological message, or who should be exalted, different because of the outcomes of stories.
There.
Are you familiar?
Yeah, I know whereof you speak. I mean, there has been an effort made to align these things. I would say this: I think there are certain Greek texts, again, cosmologies and primeval history stuff, their version of it. There are certain texts where you can strike some correlations, and they are really interesting. But there are other places where they just fall flat. So I think part of the reason for that is there's a very expensive book, and if any of you can feel it in your heart to spend $165 on this book, I would just love to have. No, it's ridiculous. It's by a guy named West is his last name. It's called The East Face of the Helicon, and it's a scholarly work, and it shows how all the Greek mythologies are backdropped by ancient Near Eastern stuff. They just bleed into it. So there's a lot to that. I think it would be overstating the case to say that you could align that material with most of the biblical characters, like let's say in Genesis 1 to 11. You don't have that many characters anyway, but there is something to it, but it's not. It's an issue of detail, and frequency, coverage, I guess might be a better way to put it. You get some really striking things out of the text that the New Testament also picks up on. If you ever want to do an interesting study, do a Greek word study on the word Tartarus, Tartarus. That comes right out of secular Greek texts, and it's for the bad place. But Peter uses it in a very interesting place that matches with how it's used in Greek mythology. Again, it's theological polemic, but you don't get as much of it usually when the New Testament's doing that. It's going back to the old, because that's the canon, that's the consciousness of the writer. Yes. Questions? Anything else?
I can see it being somewhat discouraging if they were not full of Ugaritic scholars. How can you read?
And they all should be. That's the shame of it.
Come up goes saying I can read the Old Testament, I can understand it. When I just know how to read it, understand it. Where you say
you will be amazed at what you can learn. I said this last week. I think I'm going to essentially repeat it, but Bible dictionaries and Bible encyclopedias are wonderful things. Now, I want you all to think that I've invested all this time and boy, there's just secrets that only Mike can tap into, but I'm going to try to destroy that here in the next 2 minutes. If you learned transliteration, Greek and Hebrew, what the English characters are for the Hebrew and Greek characters, and you bought things like Anchor Bible Dictionary and especially Dictionary of Deity and Demons in the Bible, which is the only reference source I've ever had that I could just read cover to cover. I've read most of it. It's just, that's like devotional reading. Okay, it's just wonderful. But there are key sources like that are designed for people who just know English and transliteration, and they'll take you into all sorts of stuff. So use reference material. Now, the other thing that I recommended is start looking for vocabulary and phrasing touch points between passages. The scholarly term for that is intertextuality. You can impress someone or bore someone with that later. Intertextuality. And that's the idea that biblical writers read the stuff that came before them, and they're drawing connections. Like, wow, who'd have thought of that? They do it all the time because they assume, a biblical writer assumes that you know that stuff really well. So they only need to drop a phrase or a word or 2 or 3 words in one cluster. And they think you're tracking. Let me put it this way, learn to read your Bible like it's a novel. You know, you all have this experience. When you read novels and you're reading 2 characters dialoguing, we've all had this experience. Well, we'll read something and you'll go, I'll bet that he had that character say that specifically because he's going to reference it later. And you just sort of store it away. Or this place that he described, it seems like it's important. I'm going to try to remember the description because the writer may allude to that later, and I'm supposed to make the mental connection. It's plotting, okay? If you read it like a novel, the biblical writers do that all the time. They're not going to go back and repeat everything in the Old Testament. They're just going to drop names and places, little words here and there, phrases, because they assume you know it that well. And if you read it like fiction, like it's a story, you can start to pick up on some of that, even in English. Oh, wait, where have I seen that term before? That 2 or 3 terms clustered together. Oh, yeah. Or you can use software. Chances are if you see like 4 words together in one passage and the same 4 words occur together in a cluster in another one, there's probably something going on there. Okay, and you can go look it up. But there's all sorts of techniques you can use like that. It's just you have to sort of develop a sense for plotting, for strategy. The writers have strategy. They're not just filling up space. They're doing things that are deliberate.